All right, so we have a number of questions, and I honestly have to say, this is one of my favorite topics. We're talking about visionary leadership, and I'm sure you'll all agree, good management makes or breaks a project, or a company, or a group, right? So I'm going to start off with yourself, Cindy, because you've had an incredible background. Can you tell us a little bit about, because we have a lot of leaders in the room, we've got great project managers, what are the key attributes that you see that make great leaders? What are those traits?
Yeah, I think it's interesting we're talking about it now, in visionary leadership as a topic, because we're seeing a lot of that come to life in the way that leaders are talking about trends and predictions for this year, right? We're seeing a lot of those kinds of things that are coming out. And one of the things that I think is interesting is when you're a visionary leader and you're predicting or looking at trends, you recognize that the ability to spot that trend isn't really in knowing what the trend is, it's really in knowing what to do about the trend. So the vision can only be executed once you add sort of action to that, right? Mm-hmm. And you talked about change and disruption and all of the things that are happening in the world. The only way that true leaders can actually implement those visions is by making things simple. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, ChatGPT is a really good example of that. So the algorithms that have powered generative AI have been around for years, right? But it wasn't until someone compared or paired the powerful algorithm with the easy to use interface, and it captured people's imagination, right? And made 100 million people sign up for the tool in just a few weeks. So I think that that sort of combination of seeing the vision and then recognizing that you need to inspire people to that vision through simplicity. Otherwise, I kind of think about vision without action being a little bit like having a roadmap but no gas money, or having a blueprint but wearing a tool belt that's empty or something like that. So that's how I think those things are what to me describe that kind of visionary leadership, which is seeing it but then knowing what you need to do about it and inspiring people to that action.
And keeping it simple.
Exactly.
Really love that note. So just keeping it simple so that, of course, your stakeholders and clients and your internal members as well are able to execute.
Yeah, and if we think about the simplicity, and ChatGPT is a great example, but there are lots of others that are out there too, and it really is that simplicity that inspires the vision to come to life.
Fantastic, I love that. Now over to you, Rasmus, and now you're an expert coach and you've worked with brands such as Microsoft, Google, Facebook, so I'd love to hear, and no doubt you've met so many leaders in your time. I'd love to get your insights about innovation. One of the traits for a successful leader or visionary leader is the fact that he's innovative and constantly innovative. How do we constantly be innovative? How do we do that?
Well, I think it's an interesting topic, innovation, and where it comes from and what drives it. I think the first thing to say about it is it requires work. It's not just like you sit in a meditative state of mind and then you become innovative. Like it requires hard work. In my world, elite sports, we talk a lot about what we call deliberate practice. To become an expert, someone that really pushes the limits of your field, you gotta practice. There's this rule about 10,000 hours of practice, and really I think that's important to know about innovation. That people who are innovative, they work for it. They work hard. It requires effort. You care about something. You really dig into it, and you're curious about it. So I think that's the first thing. The other thing, which I think is a more like a counterintuitive thing about innovation, is that I think often it's not driven by this blue sky thinking and you got lots of money, lots of resource, lots of time. But actually, I think it's often constraints, scarcity that drives innovation. So I know a good example of that. Someone told me quite a few years ago was with Southwest Airlines, that probably the most profitable airline in the history, and then one of their competitive edges has been this fast turnaround. a plane comes in, passengers out, passengers in, you go again. Because if you're an airline, you want to spend more time in the air than on the ground. That's where you make the money, right? So the faster you can turn around the plane, the better. They had this world record 10-minute turnaround, which really gave them an edge. But it didn't sort of come up because they said with all the resources in the world. It came up because they came up with it because they had a problem, a financial problem, and actually had to sell one of their planes off from the fleet just to survive. And then had to ask themselves, can we actually fly the original schedule with 3 planes instead of 4 planes? And they found a process and a way to do that. So really this question about can we do a faster turnaround didn't come because they had all the money, all the time, all the resources, but because they had a problem, a constraint, and no innovation. So I think that's important also to note about innovation, that it's really, to embrace the constraints you have and using them constructively. That's how innovation often happens.
Sometimes you have no choice but to innovate.
Yeah.
Right? Absolutely. Over to you, Dr. Steve. Now, I know that you're leading the PMO for SaaS IPO readiness. Do you want to tell us a little bit about one of the most important leadership traits for a leader that's about to take his business to IPO?
Sure. SaaS, we're a 47-year-old software company, the largest privately held software company in the world, and we're a very strange-looking company in terms of an IPO. You usually think of the startup out of Silicon Valley that is pursuing an IPO, and often the reasons for the IPO are, you need a bunch of cash to fund a future investment, or maybe you have investors who are looking for their exit. And so it's important as a leader to understand your why. Understand the why. Why are you pursuing what you're pursuing? And for us, thinking about an IPO, we have to be very careful about that. It's not just about the bottom line for us. As a 50-year-old company that's known for being one of the best places to work, a strong company culture, the why for us is about preserving our legacy, our culture, our employees, our market leadership into our next 50 years. And that's very different than just trying to maximize the bottom line. And so when you think about understanding your why, it lets you kind of use one of those 7 habits of highly effective people, that second one about starting with the end in mind. If you know what your why is, you can lead a project or an effort in a way that helps you keep your eyes on the end goal. So knowing your why and then understanding how the end is going to look and then starting with that in mind, it lets you lead in a way that gets you to the outcome, not just looking one step at a time.
Fantastic, great advice. Now, Cindy, back to yourself, communication. And I think we all know the backbone behind any success, especially for a leader, is how he communicates, how he or she communicates, not only to his team, but to his stakeholders and everybody, the whole entire ecosystem. Tell us about your advice that you've seen, great communication tips, and how does a great leader become a better leader when it comes to communication?
Sure, I think that I'm a big fan of asking people, of just communicating about communication. There's loads of research out there that talks about the fact that communication is the primary reason that projects fail. When I was at PMI, we did a fair amount of that as well. There's also some research that shows that having an active and engaged executive sponsor in a project is the top driver of project success. So when you pair those things together and pair really good communication with getting an active, engaged executive sponsor, you see project success rates upward of 80%, which is good. If you don't have those two things, then the success rates are relatively abysmal. But one of the ways that is most effective to communicate and really get your voice across is, first of all, ask your various stakeholders how they want to be communicated with, but then speak in their language. And it's hard to know what that is if you haven't asked them, or if you don't do the things that they do. For example, some research that I've done within the IBM Institute for Business Value talks about the fact that executive sponsors, who often are CEOs now with digital transformation initiatives, especially relative to generative AI, so you're looking at visibility at the highest levels in the organization. But they're reading and consuming and understanding white papers and the kinds of work that our organization puts out. They're doing it 3 hours a week. And so what I've advised folks is to do what they do. If you want to know what keeps them up at night and you want to communicate effectively with the people who are your executive sponsors, then do what they do. Set aside the time, invest the time in reading what they read, watching what they watch, understanding the kinds of things that they communicate. I mean, when I've been executive sponsor of projects, I've wanted my project managers to communicate in the language that I understand, right? I don't need to know the technical details of the project. I want them to know, absolutely. Another stakeholder might have a whole set of different requirements for communication. So, yeah, I would say ask them what it is, and then once you know, and by the way, generative AI can help with this. You know, if I were a project manager, I'd probably start with asking a Gen AI tool to put together a stakeholder communication program. Then I'd ask them, does this seem right to you? Does that meet your needs? And then I'd figure out how to do what they do, so that I could best understand how to
So
communicate.
utilize AI to specifically understand who
I would
actually
ask
the audience is.
I would ask it to start with for sure, because it would shortcut the process of getting to the end.
I love that. Great advice.
Yep.
Dr. Steve, now you've met some incredible leaders there. What would you say have been some of the standout leadership lessons that you've seen over your past 20 odd years of business in the public sector and the private sector?
Sure. I had the good fortune of being part of a senior official in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security for about 13 years before my time at SAS. And I got to see really from the front row the formation of a brand new cabinet level agency in government. It was the largest reorganization of the United States government since World War II. And so it was in dire need of leadership to build a new organization with 250,000 employees. So I actually wrote at the end of all that time 10 leadership lessons that I saw out of the formation of the Department of Homeland Security. Don't worry, I'm not going to give you all 10.
We would love to, actually. We'd love to get
I thought I'd pick just one, and I'd like to pick one where I made a big mistake when I was very young in my career. We had been working on a large technical project to understand the risks from different threats to the United States. Given my background as a scientist, we were looking at biological and chemical threats to the country. So we spent 2 years doing a big computational simulation to figure out what all these risks were and the right way to spend money to most secure the nation. And after 2 years of work, we came to give the briefing. I was in my 20s then. We came to brief all the senior leaders, and we thought we did a fantastic job showing the best way to spend this money. And one of the very senior leaders said, "Dr. Bennett, I love what you've done here, but here in my agency, we just trust our gut. We don't need any of that information." And I realized the lesson that I learned was the importance in building coalitions as a leader. The technical work was outstanding. I still think it was outstanding. But I should have had that gentleman in my office 2 years before helping me build the project, being part of the team that designed the project, helping us direct the project so that when we get to the end of it, we have a coalition of people who are supporters and champions. So big lesson learned in leadership, public or private. How do you build a team of people to come with you as you lead the project? It's critical.
Fantastic. Love it. And Rasmus, what are some of the key leadership lessons that you've actually gone and found out through elite sports specifically? And how do you think those can be applied specifically to now other industries?
Well, I think leadership is, in its essence, about convincing people and driving people to do more than they thought they were capable of. And I think that has a lot to do with how you communicate, a reality, an exciting reality about where you could go. One company I spent quite a bit of time with in the past was Lego, and I remember there was this some years back. They delivered the best result in the history of the company, so everyone was super excited and happy. And then the CEO, Jörn B. Krustop at the time, came in, and we were in this meeting, and he stood up in front of his team and he said, "Well done, guys, you've done a great job. Congratulations, but I also have a question. I want to challenge you with this question. Because I know we are twice as profitable as the three worst competitors in the toy industry combined, but are you actually sure we are competing in the toy industry? Because if an 11-year-old boy did go down to the shop and he did not buy a Lego product, what would he buy instead? Would he buy a product from Mega Bloks, one of the good old players in the toy industry? Would he buy a football jersey, or maybe he would buy an iPhone? Well, let's say he bought an iPhone. What does that mean?" And then he said to them, "Well, that means that the battlefield for Lego is no longer the toy industry. Now the battlefield is the children's playroom. In the children's playroom, we don't compete against Mega Bloks, we compete against Apple. Let's try and compare our growth rates with Apple's," and then Lego starts to look like a beginner again, really. So this, question, which industry are we actually in, to create the feeling for people, yeah, we reached the top of this mountain, but hey, that was a small hill. The real mountain to climb is up here. And I think this is what good leaders do. They always put themselves in the shoes of the challenger, where you can see there's still opportunities out there that we haven't gone after. In sports, we used to say sometimes if you want to stay number one, you have to think and act as if you were number two, you know, and I think this is an important leadership lesson.
To keep pushing forward.
Yeah.
I love her. Now, Cindy, we're going to go through some of these finale questions now. I think one of the most important questions to ask is, you have some incredible managers in the room. There's project managers, there's leaders. What would you say your best advice is to, and they're already great leaders, but how do we make them better leaders? What would be your best advice?
Yeah, I think my advice to project managers, to leaders, to everyone who's got the opportunity to lead, whether it's a project or some other sort of initiative, is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And what I mean by that is leaders by their nature are really risk takers, and I don't see that changing. But generative AI is really speeding, the time at which, or between which somebody has an idea, somebody can test the idea, can build something, can test again. And I think the leaders that are going to be the most successful in that constant sort of iteration and change cycle is those who can balance being first with being right. And that's why I would suggest, stop and think. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Okay. Tell us more. You've touched a lot about in terms of AI. How important is it for leaders to ensure that they are actually using AI in their day-to-day roles? And how can they be utilizing now AI more so to become better leaders?
Yeah, I think I'm sure everybody's heard a lot about AI this week and in the last 12, 13 months, but what I would suggest and have suggested is experiment with it, because nobody's figured it out yet. There's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of available, firsts to be had with generative AI. So the only way you're gonna get good at it is to start experimenting with it and use it for various different things. Use it for your home life, use it for your work life, use it for your kids, use it for your parents, and just get familiar with what it can do. Many of you are going to understand the inner workings of generative AI better than I do. Many of you aren't going to need to understand the inner workings of generative AI to make it work for you in what you do, but you won't know until you get into it and start experimenting with it and figure out where it can actually enhance your capability. We talk about this as the era of the augmented workforce. So generative AI is going to be sitting next to you. It's going to be your assistant in some way. Get used to it and try to figure out how it can best make you a better you.
Yeah, I'm going to pick your brain just one more thing just about that. I mean, what are the examples that you've seen that really great leaders have used AI for? Can you give them specific examples? I mean, you used one in regards to communication. Ask it about its target market, the demographics, so we can understand the language to use in terms of communication. I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but could you give us maybe some other examples that how leaders are actually using AI in leadership?
Yeah, I think the first sort of use cases are really around summarization and sort of taking institutional knowledge in many ways, the world's knowledge, if you talk about ChatGPT or those kinds of big, global large language models. But I think the leaders that we're seeing, among our clients and others that are starting to use it are really looking at it as a repository of institutional knowledge that used to be stuck in someone's head. And when they left, it would go with them. Or when they worked in a different department, you couldn't always access it. Lessons learned, for example, is one that we hear from a lot of people, that generative AI can really help shortcut the time that it might take to overcome a challenge, because you can access easily that lesson learned from something, a project someone else did. So again, I think it's a matter of figuring out where you're spending the most time, where you're having the most barriers, and then try to use generative AI to speed up that time or to improve your productivity. If it doesn't work, then move on to something else.
Great advice. Dr. Steve, what would be your final remarks to these incredible leaders that are in the room? How do they become better leaders?
There's lots of definitions of what a leader is. I think the simplest might be someone that has followers, and a lot of us, a lot of us have people that follow us because they have to, and that's fine. We all have jobs where that's somebody works for you and they follow you. But I would submit that how you can be a leader that people want to follow is something to work towards. And for me, that's working on being a servant leader. The ability to put your people first, the ability to serve them and make sure they have what they need. That's something that's worth pursuing. And we exist as leaders, I think, to serve our people, not the other way around. And the more that we do that, the more we have people who will follow us anywhere, even when we ask them to do crazy things like compete against Apple instead of the other toy stores. So I would encourage folks to think about, how can I be a servant leader? How can I serve the people that I lead rather than expecting them to serve me?
And last but not least, Rasmus, what are your thoughts in terms of what was that finale comments in terms of really great advice that you want to leave these leaders with, how to become better leaders? And you've written a book, and I'd love for you to share a little bit actually from your book. You've written a book on this particular topic as well, about leadership.
Well, yeah, I don't think there is a recipe really, I mean, I studied some of the most impressive high performance environments in sports, and there's all good coaches, good leaders there. I think a good coach is instrumental for in a high performance environment, but they are very different. They were very different, the guys I met, and I think that's probably, you gotta find your own path. There's no, there's different types of leadership that can work, but I think the main thing is to be authentic and find your own way and lead based on your own personality. And a bit like Dr. Steve said, I think leadership is not about you; it's about them. It's about what you can do for them. And I think in football, where I spent a lot of time, we used to have a lot of ex-players becoming coaches and stuff, and very often it doesn't work out, because when you've been a player, it's about you for 15 years. But leadership is not about, it's about them.
Yeah.
And it's a completely different mindset. I think that's important to remember.
Fantastic, great advice. Guys, can I get a big round of applause, please, for our panelists? Cindy, Dr. Steve, Rasmus, thank you for your time. That's incredible insights, Rochelle. I'm just going to recap some of the things that I'm going to certainly take away. Cindy, you said something that was really, really interesting. In fact, so simple, but I'm certainly going to keep it with me. But it's just to really keep it simple. If you want your team to understand it, you need to explain it to them in a really simple way, and that's how you're going to become a really good leader. Some things that we've just discussed there is, Dr. Steve, you said the why. Really understand why you're even in this role. Why are we doing this particular, project? Why are we doing it? And looking at certainly the ending game all the time. In terms of innovation, constantly be looking at innovation. I loved your point, Rasmus, when you said even if you are at the number one position, pretend that you're in the number two, because that's how you're going to constantly be striving, constantly be innovating. And I love just some of the finale comments here, is that it's not about, even for this, whenever, even on stage, this is not about us, this is about you and making sure that you're getting these insights. And it's exactly the same when it comes to leadership. It is not about the leader, but it's about the team just in general. So that's fantastic takeaways. So thank you again for our incredible panelists. And we'll discuss, of course, the visionary leadership when it comes to success. Thank you again. Thank you.